Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Political State Podcast from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman's podcast studio in our downtown newsroom. Joining me here is the Oklahoman's federal government reporter, Chris Casteel. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Ben. Thanks.
Yeah, kind of a cloudy Thursday morning here. Hopefully we'll get some rain. We could definitely use it. Our guest this week, joining us in the podcast studio, is Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma. Senator, thanks so much for your time. Welcome.
Well, it's a little cooler today. Yesterday I was in the Panhandle, and it was yesterday it was 112 degrees, and today's a little nicer.
Yeah, there's no relief. I guess it's hot in Washington. It's hot here. It's just
it's the same in Washington. Yeah. Actually, It's a little worse in Washington because humidity is always a little higher there.
Yeah, maybe a little worse there in the swamp. Well, Senator, thanks so much for your time. I want to dive into several topics, but I guess we'll start with this one. You know, seems like we're always in an election year now, just to kind of the modern day of politics, but an election year for you or for your seat in 2020 next year. What are your plans for next year? Are you running for re-election?
Well, if I were, I wouldn't tell you.
Okay.
And the reason is I chair the largest committee in the United States Senate. And once you're an announced candidate, you can't be as effective as you normally are. And so people know that I have not made any plans to retire. And in fact, I'll tell you kind of a funny story. Last time I ran, all they could say about me was, Inhofe, you're too old to be in the United States Senate. And my response was, when I'm too old to fly an airplane upside down, then I'm too old to be in the United States Senate. Well, just for your information, I went out last Sunday and flew my airplane upside down just to make sure I still could.
Yeah, and you passed the test, I assume. You're sitting here with us.
I'm here.
You had a pretty healthy fundraising quarter, so there are apparently some people who want you to run again. You've got the cash reserves building up, so you're at least poised to run if you are inclined to do so.
Yeah, I lost once, and I didn't enjoy that very much.
Yeah. Well, you said you wouldn't be quite as effective in your position as chair. Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, that means right now I chair the committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, and it is the largest committee. It's the one with the largest budget, obviously, and so we are taking over right now from leftovers of the last administration, the Obama administration. People don't like to admit it, but Obama was very honest about it. He allowed our military to drop down in some areas that I hope we have a chance to talk about. And consequently, we're in a rebuilding mode right now. And this last budget now is going to put us back to kind of where we were 10 years before. And to do that, we get into a lot of very controversial areas in terms of foreign policy. Things are happening in Iran and all of that, and sometimes a response will come out on something that anyone who's the chairman of a committee will say, and they say, "Well, you're just saying that because you're running for office," and that's just not the case at all. And I just hate to lose some level of effectiveness.
Yeah. So when you talk about wanting to kind of rebuild the military, are we talking about resources, manpower? I mean, kind of where did you see the danger of where we were?
Oh, I can be specific. In fact, during the period of time, as we had our people come into the Senate Armed Services Committee and would give some of the meetings we'd have were classified, closed to the public. Some were open, but in areas like our brigade combat teams, we got to the point toward the tail end of the Obama administration where only 30% of our brigade combat teams could work because we couldn't maintain them. Our F-18s that the Marines were flying, only 40% of those could fly. Well, that should be at 80% because we couldn't afford the maintenance. What he did to the budget, and I'll just give you the last 5 years, because people don't understand this. The last 5 years of the Obama budget, that'd be 2010 to 2015. During that time, using constant dollars, the presidential budget in 2010 would have been kind of what he inherited. That was $796 billion. 5 years later, that was $582 billion. That's a reduction of 25%. We've never had a reduction, period, in our defense budget, because every president and I've gone back and looked at this since World War II. The presidents, Democrats and Republicans, have always said the primary function of our government in the United States is to defend America. We're defending America. That's what we do. And until this president came in and he said no, and he was honest about it, and he established something that's never been there before called parity. He said, in the United States, I want to make sure that while I'm president, that for every dollar you put into defense system, you have to put a dollar into non-defense. And again, that hasn't happened before. Well, that put us in a situation where we have two different types of enemies or competitors out there. You have China and Russia. They are the peer competitors that we have. They're people that we are competing. They have equipment. Some of their equipment is better than our equipment. Most people, and I talk to groups of people, primarily out of the state of Oklahoma, and I say that they have, China might have better artillery than we have. It's something that nobody agrees with. They say, no, we have the best of everything. That used to be true, and it became not true. Hypersonics is a good thing. I hate to use technical terms here, but that's kind of the state of the art of where is our defense system going. Hypersonics is a system that we're developing that moves and operates at more than 5 times the speed of sound. We were way ahead of China and Russia at the beginning of the Obama administration. During the Obama administration, those 8 years, they passed us. That's a scary thing. We watch China, for example, in the South China Seas. They are building, they're building islands out there. Totally illegally, but they're doing it anyway. And in these islands, they are doing things underground as if they're preparing for World War III. And our allies, as well as our adversaries in that part of the world, all know it. And it's not just there; it's all over the world. You look at Djibouti in northern Africa. They now have a very large place. I was there not long ago, and they preclude people from flying over, which we did anyway. And that's underground in Djibouti, and it goes as far south in Africa as Tanzania. So China is all over the place. Now, Russia is a different type of a competitor out there. They're not doing it with the people. China and people are always saying, well, wait a minute, we spend more money on our defense than China and Russia put together. And that's because the largest single expenditure is what we refer to as end strength. That's people. We spend money. We want to make sure that we have good housing for our military. It's an all-volunteer force. And consequently, they don't do that. They're communist countries. All they do is they just issue the guns that say go out and kill somebody. Well, so that did allow them to pass this up in those areas. It's the most dangerous world we've ever had. I look at countries and I see countries like North Korea, like Iran, that have questionable leadership at the top. And I'm being charitable when I say that. So you don't know what they're going to do, but they have the capability of taking out an American city. I look back at the days of the Cold War wistfully and thinking, those are the days when we had two superpowers. We knew what they had. They knew what we had. And it was all predictable. It's not that way anymore.
Yeah. This president seems determined to get everybody out of all American troops out of Afghanistan. Is it time?
Well, I think a lot of that was rhetoric. He still said the time is going to be condition based, and what are the conditions, and when that comes, we will. He's already made reductions. In some areas he has, in some areas he has not. So I would respond by saying, Chris, it's going to continue to be condition based.
Where's the Pentagon brass on this issue? I mean, do they what purpose do they see in still having a U.S. presence in Afghanistan?
Well, I think they will look at it and they can see where was the gathering place before 9/11, and has that changed, and where are our enemies now, because they weren't originally from there, but that was what we refer to as the gathering place. And they know that it's the threats are still there. The Pentagon is essentially, in their view, the same as the president. Obviously, this is our system in America is not run by the military, and that's one of the systems that we have that's different than most other countries, and so the personnel in the Pentagon that are the appointments of this president are appointments that have military background, and they have people in there who have a perspective that the military has. So when we, in the committee that I chair, we have them coming into my committee to have a hearing, and normally that'll last 2 hearings a week, 3 hours each hearing. So that's a lot of people coming in. They are the military. So we have the military and the Pentagon being very much almost the same thing. And then the administration, a very strong military administration. I will say this about our president. He is, before he makes any decision, I'm there with him on that. He comes to our committee, and just as an example, when we decided that the Secretary of the Army would be the best Secretary of the Defense that we could have, he called up and he said, "Who's your choice for the Secretary of Defense?" And when I told him the current Secretary of the Army, he said, "Well, I agree with that. So it's your call. That's who you want." That's how it happened. And so best answer to your question is militaries to making these decisions instead of outsiders who don't know that much about it, along with the talent that's out there from years past.
I want to switch to a domestic issue, been often discussed since the mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, and that's gun control.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up 9/11. You and I were in Washington after the Oklahoma City bombing and after 9/11, and what followed both of those horrific attacks was legislation, Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and then the Patriot Act, where the lawmakers were telling the U.S. citizens you might have to put up with some inconveniences, maybe some minor infringements on your civil rights as we fight these acts of fight these enemies. But there was a lot of support for doing that. Both of those bills wound up passing overwhelmingly. Patriot Act became, they let a lot of that expire. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, in the wake of all these shootings, these what some people consider domestic terrorism, there hasn't been a rush to, bipartisan rush to pass legislation to deal with.
Well, there hasn't, because you're in a political season right now, and you have 20 very liberal Democrats running for president, and in my opinion, none of the 20 are going to make it. But nonetheless, all of this campaign is doing nothing but talking about how I can out-liberal the next guy. And when you do that, that's grabbing the scenes. So when we had the 2 major things take place last weekend, the first thing they all wanted to do was to blame that on our president. Now, I've never seen in the years that I've been in which a lot of people think is too many years, but I've been in for a long period of time, I've never seen a level of hatred for an individual as I see the hatred for a guy named Trump. Here's a guy, when you look at what his accomplishments are, and I carry in fact, you ought to give me a copy of that. I may want to use that. When I carry a thing about the 10 things that happened because of Trump that have not happened before. It starts right off with the best economy of my lifetime.
Well, this predates Trump in terms of some of the shootings that have happened. I mean, Sandy Hook was during the Obama administration.
No, I know that, but during the Obama administration, do you ever remember they said this is Obama's fault? No, they didn't. Now they're saying all of a sudden, well, it's different now. This is Trump's fault.
Well, I guess maybe what I'm saying is, you had a single incident of a shoe bomber, and now everybody takes their shoes off to go through an airport line. But you've had just dozens of these mass shootings, and there's you can't reach any kind of agreement on a universal background check, something, because
I would have to disagree with that, because right now there's more activity on the red flag effort and more activity on.
What would you support? Would you support the House bill, the universal background checks, or the red flag?
Well, the red flag is it kind of leaves it up to the states, in which I like that idea, because I anything that is is something that will sell and is good for California, and as a general rule, is not good for Oklahoma. And I'd be glad to spend an hour to elaborate on that. But in Oklahoma, we could have a type of a thing where a judge would make that decision. But if it looks like a judge is against our Second Amendment rights, then this legislature can change that. They can change it in Oklahoma while it isn't changed someplace else. And consequently, if anyone tells you that they are for the red flag, there is not a single law out there, but it's in development right now. In fact, you have several members who are saying, we're just encouraging. Which one is that's doing that? Yeah. They're trying to encourage states to do it, and I joined that crowd. I encourage states to do that also. So let's wait till we come up with what we want, what criteria we want to use. But if someone has been convicted of a crime in the background or a violent crime, yeah, they shouldn't be able to buy guns.
Have you looked at, I think it's Toomey Manchin bill on universal background checks? Have you taken a look at that? Do you have any kind of sense of whether you could support that?
Whose bill is it?
I believe it's Toomey and Manchin, Senators Toomey and Manchin.
That's in. I guess they're working on that in their committee, and the answer is no.
Okay.
That you wouldn't support?
No, I don't. I'm not sure what they're doing. They're in the middle of developing something right now.
Okay, well, so without having specific legislation front, the concept of expanding background checks from where they are.
Oh yes,
now.
I would.
So
support
you would
that.
support. You would support.
Well,
that.
that's what the red flag is, and it's also putting the judiciary in there to make sure, or to attempt to make sure that that's not an infringement on Second Amendment rights. And I think depending on the product they come out with, the answer is yes. I would support it.
And so there's legislation from the House that now is over on the Senate side that would expand background checks. Is that something?
Well, the House is different. The House is run by the very liberal wing of the Democrat Party, and they're going to come out with they want to do away with Second Amendment rights to start with. So I think it's very unlikely that I'd be supportive of something that came from the House. But I think there could very well be expansion of background checks that would end up, the House may look at that saying, well, it's better than nothing.
And so would you support, that right now the Senate's recess. Is this something you feel like the Senate should reconvene to discuss and debate and to vote on?
Or
is there an urgency right now to come back and to move on this?
Which is happening right now. We're in recess, but committees are meeting and they're putting things together. And every day you write about different approaches to it. And so I think the red flag is the best example to use. We don't know yet, but the concept is good. The concept is saying that if there are certain people who should not be able to have weaponry, and obviously if you throw the judiciary in there, that's a good starting point, and that's kind of where they are right now.
Yeah. Obviously the focus right now is on guns. There's also a focus on the president's rhetoric towards immigration. Now, you'd already said that you feel like he's being unfairly criticized. I don't want to ask you necessarily specifically if you blame him for the shootings, because I don't think you would. You've kind of said that.
Of course not.
But what about just his rhetoric towards immigration in general? Can you see? Do you feel like he's crossed a line at all? Do you support what he said? Some pretty inflammatory things about the danger and the risk that the immigrant community poses on the United States.
Here's the problem that he has. If he talks about, well, first of all, when you talk about a porous border, we have a porous border. We should not have a porous border. We never should have. You talk to people like Netanyahu, and he said, I don't understand America. How could the people be against that? Now, the effort there is not anything having to do with Mexicans. That it's those who are coming across the Mexican border. In fact, he's been very outspoken saying it's the criminal element, it's the terrorist element. They may be in the Middle East, they may be someplace else coming into this country, but they are coming into this country, they're coming in illegally. So what is he doing? He is saying that internationally, they're not supposed to be able to do that, because if you're using the
Asylum.
Okay, let's say the asylum system. They're going to have to show that somehow their lives are in danger and all of that. How do they do that? They get on the docket and they plead their case to a court. Now, the problem is they do that. They're already over here. They disappear. They don't show up for a court date, and that's the way they come into the United States. And that's what the president is trying to stop. Now, I originally tried to do that with a law that said if you're getting ready for an asylum hearing, you have to do it. You have to make your proposal from the United States in Mexico. It can be a consul. It can be an embassy. But you don't cross over and get into the United States until such time as you have your court date and they can see to it that you are going to meet your court date. Well, that's very reasonable. The problem was there was a legal problem where part of that was not supported by our court system. So the president is now doing all he can do through an executive action, and we're passing legislation now that will keep people on the other side of the border and force anyone who's coming into the United States, keeping in mind, these are not Mexicans, most of them. These are people from other countries. They can be from Central America, South America, the Middle East, or any place else. But once they come to a free country, they should apply for asylum there. That's what they're supposed to do. Mexico is a free country. So these people should have applied for asylum as they came into the southern Mexican border before coming into this country. That's what he's trying to achieve. Now, that is not anything that he can say that can be interpreted by the media who hates him so much. They're going to make it try to make it look bad and make it look like it's something that he's groups of people are finding offensive.
But you just presented, whether you agree with it or not, you just presented your policy position in a pretty articulate way. I mean, and you're making your case and talking about the specifics of asylum. That's not what we necessarily get from the president. I mean, it's not I don't think I don't think you have to put words in his mouth to say that some of his rhetoric has been pretty incendiary. I mean, when you talk about that we have an invasion of immigrants, I mean, that's not arguing about asylum practices. I mean, that's riling up. I mean, what about his rhetoric at rallies?
It's his rhetoric. It's his style. Let me tell you, this guy's getting things done no one else can get done. And as I just got back. I mentioned yesterday. I was in Enid. I was in Woodward. It's 112 degrees. I was talking to farmers, and in just normal, what I refer to as real people, and they understand, and it's refreshing. The media doesn't like it, his rhetoric, but I think the people do like it, and I think the people are tired of wishy-washy politicians who tell them what they want to hear, and don't really stand for it. One thing everybody knows about this president is those things he campaigned on, he met, and he's following through. Why is the embassy moving to Jerusalem? Every president in my memory said they're going to do that, and none of them ever have done it. This guy made commitments, and he's doing it. And the people in the press, they hate it too. They don't like this idea. They hate this guy with a passion I've never seen anything like. Not you guys. Don't play that game with me. I'm talking about the New York Times, the Washington Post. They hate this president with a passion. And so they're going to take anything he says and try to paint it in terms. Look what happened only yesterday. The New York Times came out with a headline that the far left didn't like, and so by the time the second edition came, they changed it just to make him look bad. They thought, well, you're making the president look good. You got to change that, and so they did. They didn't wait till the next day to run it. They did it in the second edition of the New York Times.
Senator,
that's what this guy's faced with.
Senator, you talked about the accomplishments and the things that Trump is trying to do. One of the things that he has committed to doing is doing something about drug prices, and I think there's bipartisan support in Congress for addressing the just escalating costs of drug prices. You're going to meet this morning with Continental Resources CEO Harold Hamm about diabetes, insulin prices. He's put a lot of research money into it. I mean, what would you support? The president has talked about allowing imports, allowing the U.S. to import drugs from other countries, including Canada, where a lot of people go to buy insulin because it's so expensive here. Is that something you would support? And what would you be on board with in terms of lowering drug prices? This insulin pricing has become a crisis for so many people.
And it's funny, Chris, because I had a lot of that, not personally, but in my family. And that's been one that I have been concerned about, and I've had conversations with Harold Hamm, and I'll have another one today on that. And he has put into the Oklahoma University's program that deals with this subject matter several $1 million. I think around $10 million. And anytime you get someone willing to do that he is really looking at this and wanting to effect a change, to me, that's something that always gets my attention, because you have people willing to belly up and do something, not just something that something feel good that happens to be out there. So the answer is yes. It's a complicated issue for a couple of reasons. One is it takes a lot of money to develop these different cures for different diseases, and we're doing things in America now we were not able to do in the past. And for someone who goes out and expends a lot of money in research and development, then that person should not have someone walk in later and say, "Oh, this is a good idea. You spent several $10 billion developing this, so I'm going to get rich on it." And so I think that's an unfair way to approach it. Well, that's one reason that the approach that this individual is, I think, a good approach. He's going into a major university and saying, all right, we're taking into consideration all of the research and development that's gone into this, and we need to bring down the prices, and we're going to bring them down. Now you have a lot of the pharmaceutical people who have gotten greedy, and they want to set up a system where people don't know just what their costs are, and I don't agree with that. And so there's legislation that I do agree with. And by the way, I have to say that our other senator, James Lankford, is more prominent in this area because of his background and knowledge of it, but primarily his committee assignments.
Yeah, he's on finance
of this this issue, so he's more prominent in the issue than I am. But we agree on that's where we're coming from. We want to bring the prices down, but we want to make sure that we don't fall into the category of robbing someone from what they have put into this to start with. And I think it should enjoy the light of day, and people should know what they're paying for and what the profits are.
Yeah. Well, Senator, we kind of run out of our time. We really appreciate you spending some time here in the studio to speak with us. I do want to ask you one final question as we wrap up here. Governor Kevin Stitt is in his first term. Some of your staff members are part of his team. What kind of relationship do you have with Oklahoma's, new governor, and kind of how would you assess the job he's doing,
Well,
half a year in?
Well, it's appropriate because I was with him last night.
Okay.
And he is doing a great job. What he's doing, it's kind of like the other Kevin who's new, Kevin Hearns. He came in with a background of successful business background and using a lot of the ideas, and it's working. I think that the governor is doing a great job, and I encourage some of the people who have been with me in the past. Donnell is the one person that's a very prominent name comes to mind, and is doing a good job. I've had the opportunity to spend time with him. I think that he is looking at problems not politically, because he's not a political person. He's an intelligent person. He's motivated in the right way. I've spent a lot of time with him. I think he's doing a great job.
Yeah. Well, Senator, thanks again for your time. Good luck with things moving forward. And I know you're not going to answer the question directly here in the near future about whether you're running again, but I guess I'll just ask you how your flying upside down is going, and that'll
well.
give us an indication.
I did a good job
of
last Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll check in on that here in a few months and see if we can read the winds on what you're thinking for 2020. But Senator Inhofe, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Political State Podcast. I'm Ben Felder, along with Chris Casteel. You can find this and every other episode on your favorite podcasting app, also on the Oklahoman's YouTube channel. Once again, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.